My son shoved me into the mud, and my neighbors just stood watching. It had rained all morning, turning the front yard into a slick mess like a kid's slip-and-slide gone wrong. I was John, a retired carpenter in my late 60s, struggling with 2 heavy grocery bags full of milk and bread. Trevor came storming out of the house, face twisted like he'd swallowed a lemon. He wanted the car keys again, after keeping it out till 2 a.m. last night. "No way," I said firm, setting the bags down. "You're not responsible enough." His eyes flashed angry, and before I could blink, he shoved me hard in the chest. I stumbled back, feet slipping in the muck, and splat. Down I went, mud splashing up my shirt like cold paint. Pain shot through my back, but worse was the neighbors across the street. Mrs. Klein watering her flowers, the guy next door washing his car. They stared, mouths open, but not one moved to help. I lay there drenched, humiliation burning hotter than the ache. This wasn't just a bad day. This was the turning point, a wake-up slap I couldn't ignore. Just before you continue to watch, Joe would like you to subscribe to this channel and like this video. It would encourage him to keep his streak of thrilling revenge stories for you to watch. Alright, back to the story. As I pulled myself up slow, mud dripping down my face like chocolate sauce gone wrong, I made eye contact with Mrs. Klein, the same woman who'd asked me to fix her porch light last month. She quickly turned away, pretending to fuss with her hose like nothing happened. Another neighbor, the man I'd helped build a shed for free 2 summers back, just folded his arms and shook his head, like I had it coming for standing up to my own son. Their silence cut deeper than Trevor's shove, like a knife twisting slow in my gut. My pride burned hot, cheeks flaming under the dirt. I wiped my eyes, feeling like a fool in my own yard. I realized the neighborhood had quietly chosen sides. And I was alone on mine, the old guy who fixed things but couldn't fix his family. Setback hit hard, my back throbbed, but my mind raced. No more Mr. Nice Guy. Trevor grabbed the car keys from my pocket while I was still wiping mud from my shirt, his fingers digging in like hooks. "Give me those," he snarled, not even looking at my face. I tried to stand taller, but my back screamed from the fall. He slammed the car door in my face so hard the window rattled, then revved the engine like a bully showing off. As he sped off, tires spinning, he splashed more water across me, soaking my pants like a final spit in the eye. I stood in the driveway, dripping and humiliated, the cold mud seeping into my bones like regret. Across the street, I heard muffled laughter. Mrs. Klein covering her mouth, the shed guy chuckling low. For the first time in my life, I felt like a stranger in my own neighborhood, the place I'd fixed up for decades now turning its back on me. Pain twisted in my gut, sharper than the ache in my knees. I decided then, I wouldn't let this moment define me, but I wouldn't forget it either. Trevor had crossed a line, and payback brewed slow in my mind. That night, Trevor never returned home, the house echoing empty like a tomb after a funeral. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the mud still caked on my boots, flaking onto the floor like dried blood. My hands shook as I replayed the shove again and again. The force of his palms, my body hitting the ground, the neighbors' frozen stares burning hotter each time. Their silence echoed louder than any yell, like they'd judged me unworthy in that split second. I thought of my wife, what she would have said if she saw our son treat me that way, her gentle voice turning sharp with disappointment. Shame weighed on me like a stone pressing my chest, making each breath a fight. The clock ticked slow, suspense building in the dark. What if he came back angry? What if he didn't? Loneliness gnawed like a rat in the walls. I knew I couldn't keep living like this, tiptoeing around my own home, pain points agitating like open wounds. Something had to change, and soon. The next morning, my back throbbed like a bad toothache that wouldn't quit, each twist sending sparks of pain up my spine. I hobbled to the clinic, the rain from yesterday still puddling in the parking lot, like mocking reminders of my fall. The doctor poked and prodded, saying it was just a sprain, but at my age, recovery would drag on like a slow freight train. "Take it easy," he said, scribbling a prescription. I asked if stress could make the pain worse, and he nodded knowing, like he'd seen 100 old guys like me worn down by life. Trevor didn't even call to check if I was okay. Not a text. Nothing. Like I was yesterday's trash tossed in the bin. The waiting room buzzed with families chatting, kids giggling on laps, while I sat there alone, staring at faded posters on the wall. Loneliness gnawed deeper than the ache, agitating old wounds. How had my own flesh and blood turned his back? Suspense built in my chest. What if this was just the start? I wondered how a sun could turn so cold, and how I'd let it happen, ignoring the signs like storm clouds gathering. When Trevor finally returned that evening, tires crunching gravel like bones under boots, he didn't apologize or even glance at my mud-stained clothes still drying on the line. He just muttered about needing gas money, hand out like I owed him for breathing. I tried to bring up what he did, the shove, the humiliation in front of watchers, but he rolled his eyes sky high. You slipped, Dad. Don't blame me for being old and clumsy. His words stung worse than the shove, like salt rubbed into a fresh cut, agitating the raw betrayal in my gut. I stood there in the kitchen, fists clenched behind my back, pain points flaring. Years of raising him, teaching him tools, now thrown back like worthless scraps. He grabbed a beer from the fridge and slumped on the couch, flipping channels like nothing happened. Suspense hung thick. What would he do next? Demand more. That's when I quietly began keeping notes. Every word, every action, scribbled in a cheap notebook hidden in my drawer, building my case like stacking bricks for a wall he couldn't climb. I bought a cheap notebook from the dollar store the next day, slipping it into my pocket like a secret weapon. Each night, after Trevor crashed on the couch with his empty beer can scattered like fallen soldiers, I wrote down everything he said and did. Not just for memory, but for evidence. His snide remarks about my useless retirement, his demands for cash like I was an ATM with legs. The pain points dug deep. Every entry reminded me of the shove, the mud soaking my clothes, the neighbors' blank stares that screamed, not my problem. Their silence hurt worse than bruises, like old friends turning ghosts when you need them most. Trevor thought I was just scribbling crossword puzzles in my room, dodging his chaos. But page by page, my anger turned into a quiet resolve, building like a storm cloud on the horizon. I also noted the neighbors, Mrs. Klein's fake wave, the shed guy's averted eyes. Humiliation agitated like salt in a cut, but suspense grew. What if this journal became my shield? I didn't know yet what I'd use it for, but I knew I would, when the moment struck like lightning. A week later, Trevor had friends over, turning the living room into a trash pit of pizza boxes and beer spills. They blasted music so loud the windows rattled like teeth in a cold wind. I shuffled in for water, and one of them pointed at me, laughing like a hyena. Hey, Trev, is this the butler? The room erupted, buddies slapping knees. Trevor didn't defend me. He laughed too, hard and mean, like I'd told the joke myself. My face burned hot as a stove, humiliation twisting my gut like a wet rag wrung tight. I walked back to my room slow, their cackles echoing like nails on a chalkboard. The journal entry that night was longer than ever, words pouring out like blood from a fresh wound. The shove replayed, neighbors' silence, now this fresh stab. Pain points agitated fierce, years fixing their bikes as kids, now reduced to a punchline in my own home. Suspense built in my chest. How far would he push? I swore that one day, he'd regret making me his punchline, when my quiet notes turned loud. I started noticing letters piling up on the kitchen counter like unwanted guests who wouldn't leave, credit card bills in Trevor's name, collection notices stamped urgent in red ink like angry shouts. He was drowning in debt, owing thousands on gadgets and nights out, though he pretended everything was fine, strutting around like a king in borrowed robes. The irony twisted my gut like a rusty nail. I'd spent decades saving every penny from carpentry jobs, building a nest egg careful as stacking wood for winter, and now he was wrecking it all without a care. Each envelope agitated the pain points deeper, my hard-earned money slipping away to his mess, like water through cracked hands. I realized he was planning to lean on me financially, expecting I'd bail him out like always. But after the mud shove and neighbors' cold stares, that blind trust snapped like dry twig. Suspense built in my chest. What if he drained me dry? I began discreetly separating my finances, moving savings to a solo account, locking away the journal with proof. No more free handouts. Thanksgiving came cold as a stranger's stare, the air crisp with frost that bit like tiny teeth. Trevor announced casual over breakfast he was spending it with his girlfriend's family, not even asking if I'd be okay alone. Her mom's cooking turkey, he said, shrugging like it was no big deal. He grabbed his coat and left without a backward glance, the door clicking shut like a final nail in a coffin. I sat at the table with a microwave dinner, steam rising lonely as smoke from a dying fire, remembering when our house bustled with laughter, my wife carving the bird, Trevor as a kid stuffing his face. Now, emptiness echoed, pain points agitating like salt in an open wound, abandoned by my own blood on a day meant for family. Even the neighbors had their houses lit warm, clinking glasses drifting over like taunts. Suspense hung heavy. What if this became every holiday? That loneliness sharpened into steel resolve. I would never let him rob me of my dignity again, not one more crumb. The bank called mid-morning, their voice crisp like fresh paper over the phone. Mr. Hayes, unusual activity on your joint account with Trevor. Nearly $2,000 withdrawn in cash yesterday. My stomach dropped like a stone in deep water. I hadn't authorized a dime. The shock turned to fury, boiling hot as I pictured him smirking at the ATM, my hard-earned savings slipping away like sand through fingers. Pain points stabbed deep. Decades of carpentry blisters, skipped lunches to save pennies, all for him to drain me dry without a whisper. He hadn't even asked, just took like I was a walking wallet. The journal entry that night was longer than ever, words pouring out like blood from a cut, dates, amounts, his casual theft stacking up. Betrayal agitated like salt in an open wound, my trust shattered like cheap glass. Suspense built in my chest. How much more had he taken? What if the account emptied before I stopped him? I decided to meet with a lawyer in secret tomorrow at dawn. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Torres, listened patiently in her small office that smelled of coffee and old files, her pen tapping like a countdown clock. I explained everything. The mud shove, neighbors' cold stares, Trevor's demands, now this bank theft. She flipped through my journal, nodding slow. "You've already done half the work with this," she said, eyes lighting up like she'd found gold. Detailed notes, perfect evidence. She recommended setting up a trust to lock away assets, rewriting my will to cut him out, and separating finances immediately, like slamming a door on a thief. "Stay calm," she added. "Let Trevor keep digging his own grave. His mistakes will bury him." I walked out with a folder of documents thick as a brick, a sense of control I hadn't felt in years washing over me like cool rain after heat. Pain from his betrayal still throbbed, agitating like a thorn under skin, but suspense hummed. What hole would he dig next? The first brick of my revenge was officially laid, solid and waiting. That night, Trevor cornered me in the living room, his eyes gleaming like a shark smelling blood in the water. "Sign over the car to me," he demanded, shoving papers under my nose like I was a clerk at his beck and call. "You don't drive much anymore anyway." I refused flat out, my voice steady despite the ache in my back reminding me of his last shove. He sneered, leaning in close. "What good is it to you? You'll be in the ground before the tires wear out." My heart clenched at his cruelty, like a fist squeezing tight around old wounds, agitating the betrayal deeper. My own son wishing me dead for a set of wheels I'd bought him years ago. But I forced a steady face, not giving him the satisfaction of seeing me crack. He stormed off, muttering insults under his breath like poison darts. Useless old man. Pain points flared hot, decades raising him, now reduced to this. Suspense built in my gut. How far would his greed push him next? I wrote down every word in my notebook, because one day, those words would matter, stacking like evidence in a trial waiting to happen. I overheard two neighbors whispering at the mailbox the next morning, their voices carrying like smoke on the wind while I pretended to check my own letters. "Old John's losing it," one said low. "Trevor's just trying to live his life. Poor kid stuck with that burden." The betrayal of their words stung worse than Trevor's shove, like acid poured on an open cut, agitating the isolation I'd felt since that muddy day. These were my so-called friends, the ones I'd fixed gutters for during storms, mowed lawns when they were sick, built that shed free of charge. Now they saw me as a burden, not the man who'd held this street together for decades. Pain points throbbed. Their silence that day wasn't neutral. It was judgment, picking the young bully over the old helper. I ducked back inside, heart pounding. Suspense coiled tight. What lies had Trevor spread to turn them? My revenge would expose not only him, but their hypocrisy too, shining a light on the fake smiles and backstabs. One icy night in December, the driveway froze solid like a skating rink without brakes. Trevor had promised to salt it that morning, but he forgot, leaving me to shuffle out for the mail like an old penguin on thin ice. My boot hit a slick patch near the steps, and down I went, slipping hard, barely catching myself on the railing. Pain shot through my wrist like firecrackers popping, agitating the old ache from the mud shove, like poking a bruise that wouldn't heal. For a split second, dark thoughts crept in. Did he leave it unsalted on purpose, hoping I'd break my neck and solve his problems? The idea chilled me deeper than the snow biting through my coat, turning my blood to ice water. I couldn't prove it, no footprints in his guilt, but the possibility gnawed like a rat in the walls, building suspense. What if next time he didn't forget? Suspicion festered, pain points throbbing. My own son, plotting accidents? I tightened my plan that night, poring over the journal by lamplight, making sure he'd never touch my inheritance again. No more chances. Weeks later, in the dead of January, a surprise letter arrived like a snake in the mailbox, stamped from the credit company, addressed to me, but reeking of trouble. I tore it open, and my stomach turned like sour milk as I read. Trevor had opened a credit card in my name, racking up charges on booze and gadgets like he owned a money tree. Fraud stared back in black ink, agitating pain points deeper than before, my identity stolen by my own blood, like a thief wearing my face. Betrayal burned hot, building suspense. How many more secrets hid in his wallet? What if he tanked my credit completely? I photocopied everything quick, hands shaking but steady enough, adding it to my growing folder for Ms. Torres. He thought I was helpless, a doddering old fool scribbling nonsense. In truth, I was building a fortress of evidence, brick by brick, impenetrable as a bank vault. The letter was dynamite, one more spark, and it'd blow his world wide. I knew soon, he'd cross a line he couldn't step back from, and I'd be ready with the net. That night, Trevor cornered me in the kitchen after supper, his breath reeking of beer like a bar floor at closing time. "Why's there a credit card in my name?" I asked calm, holding up the statement like evidence in a trial. He froze for a moment, eyes darting like a rat in a trap, then smirked wide. "You owe me for raising me," he said, like it was the most natural thing, twisting logic into a pretzel that choked me. My jaw dropped at the cruelty, pain points agitating deep. Me, who worked blisters into calluses to feed him, now owing for his existence? Betrayal burned hot as a branding iron on skin, years of sacrifice mocked in one sentence. He laughed it off, grabbing another beer. "Don't sweat it, old man. You'll be gone soon anyway." Suspense coiled in my gut. How much more would he steal before I stopped him? That night, I wrote in the journal, "This is not my son. This is a thief wearing his face." And I promised myself, I would bring him down legally, not physically, with every scrap of proof stacking higher. Trevor invited his friends over again that weekend, turning the house into a zoo of loud laughs and clinking bottles, music thumping like a headache you can't shake. This time, they joked openly about how much money he'd inherit, their voices carrying through the thin walls like echoes in a cave. I listened from the hall, hidden in shadow, my ears burning red-hot as Trevor bragged. "Dad's got that fat savings, house too. When he's gone, it's all mine. Party at my place." His buddies hooted, slapping backs like it was a done deal. Pain points stabbed sharp. My life's work, the home I built nail by nail, reduced to his beer fund? Betrayal twisted like a knife in the back, agitating the loneliness. My wife gone, now my son plodding over my grave like vultures circling. Suspense built thick. What if he found the new will? I gripped my folder tighter, fingers white-knuckled, evidence inside like loaded bullets. Soon, he'd find out there was nothing left for him to inherit. No house, no cash, just dust. At Ms. Torres's office, the air smelled of fresh ink and polished wood, like a fresh start after a long storm. I signed my new will with a steady hand, each stroke feeling like reclaiming lost ground. Everything was placed in a trust for charity, local kids programs, the kind I'd wished for in my youth, with airtight clauses preventing Trevor from challenging a single dime. My house, the savings I'd scraped from carpentry sweat, even my beloved tools, gone from his greedy reach, locked away like treasures in a vault he couldn't crack. Relief flooded me as I walked out. washing away the mud-stuck humiliation like rain on a dirty window. Pain from his betrayal still throbbed, agitating like a splinter you can't pull, years building for him, now yanked back. But suspense hummed. Would he sense the shift? I pictured his face when the truth hit, smug grin crumbling like wet cardboard. I had finally taken back control, no more doormat dad. Now all that was left was to let him reveal himself publicly, his greed bubbling over like a pot left too long on boil. Trevor cornered me one night in the hallway after lights out, his eyes wild and desperate like a cornered raccoon ready to bite. Add my name to the deed, he demanded, voice low but shaking, breath hot with booze. This house should be mine anyway. You won't need it forever. Pain points flared sharp as rusty nails. My home, built board by board with my hands, now his grab like candy from a kid. I calmly told him no, standing firm despite the ache in my back reminding me of that mud shove. He lunged forward, shoving me against the wall hard, almost like that rainy day, his grip tight as a vice. Stars danced in my eyes, humiliation agitating fresh like reopening a scab. But this time, I didn't feel powerless. I felt prepared, a quiet thrill building suspense. Would he go further? I whispered, let go, buying time. He snarled and stormed off, muttering threats. Because I had cameras rolling, installed weeks ago without his knowledge, hidden like spies in the shadows, catching every ugly second. The footage showed everything clear as day. Trevor's shove slamming me into the wall, his threats snarling like a rabid dog, even his drunken slurs spitting venom about my useless life. I watched it on my old laptop, heart pounding like a jackhammer in my chest, pain points agitating fresh, the bruise on my arm throbbing like a bad memory that wouldn't fade. Years of putting up with his crap, now captured in pixels that couldn't lie. I backed it up on a flash drive quick, hands steady despite the shake, and stored it at Ms. Torres's office like burying treasure he'd never find. Trevor had no idea, still strutting around the house like a king on a stolen throne, thinking I was the clueless old man he could bully forever. But every shove, every insult was now his undoing, stacking like dominoes ready to topple. Humiliation from the mud day burned hotter, agitating the betrayal, my own son treating me like trash. Suspense built in my gut. When would he push again? I only needed the right moment to drop it all, watch his world shatter like glass under a boot. Spring arrived with warm breezes that melted the winter ice, but my anger stayed frozen solid inside. The neighborhood hosted a barbecue in the park down the street, smoke rising from grills like signals of fake cheer. Trevor strutted around like a peacock in full feather, cracking jokes and flipping burgers, acting the charming son everyone loved. The same neighbors who had ignored me in the mud that rainy day laughed at his punchlines, slapping his back like old pals. Mrs. Klein giggled at his story about crazy old dads, while the shed guy nodded along. My blood boiled hot as lava, pain points agitating deep, their hypocrisy stabbing like thorns in my side. After all I'd fixed for them free. I held my tongue, sipping soda from a plastic cup, watching from the sidelines like a ghost at his own wake. Suspense coiled tight. Would he slip up here, in front of them all? I fingered the flash drive in my pocket, hidden like a loaded gun. Because I knew soon, their laughter would die in their throats. Choked by the truth I'd unleash. At the barbecue, smoke curled from grills like lazy snakes, but the air thickened when Trevor snapped at me in front of everyone. I'd refused his whisper for cash, another loan he'd never repay, and he yanked my arm hard, nails digging like claws. You're useless, old man, he barked, loud enough for the whole park to hear. The crowd went silent, forks pausing mid-bite, eyes wide like deer in headlights. This time, their silence wasn't ignoring my pain like that muddy day. It was shock, like witnessing a mask slip off a monster. Pain points stabbed deep. My own son humiliating me again. Neighbors who'd borrowed my tools now frozen. Their hypocrisy burning like acid on skin. Mrs. Klein dropped her plate, the clatter echoing my shattered pride. Trevor released me with a shove, smirking like he'd won. But suspense built in my chest. Would they finally see? I calmly excused myself, heart pounding like a drum in a storm, went inside to grab my flash drive from the folder. Returning, I held it up. You all should see what your golden boy is really like, I said, voice steady but thunder brewing. Miss Torres had prepared me with a projector borrowed from her office, set up quick in the park pavilion like a makeshift courtroom under string lights. In front of everyone, neighbors munching burgers, kids paused mid-game. I plugged in the flash drive and hit play. The clips rolled, Trevor shoving me against the wall, his face twisted ugly, him rifling my wallet for cash, muttering threats, screaming insults that echoed tinny from the speakers. Gasps filled the air like popping balloons, neighbors covering their mouths in horror. "Mrs. Klein whispered, "Oh my God," her face pale as milk. Trevor's smirk drained away like water down a sink, color fleeing his cheeks. No one could unsee the truth now. The bully wearing the charming son's mask. Pain from the mud shove agitated fresh, betrayal stinging like bees in my chest. Their past silence now regret, but too late. Suspense hung thick. Would he run? He stammered. That's edited, but eyes rolled. The crowd shifted uneasy, whispers buzzing. But I wasn't finished. Because the police were already on their way, sirens faint in the distance like approaching thunder. Officers arrived at the barbecue like storm clouds rolling in fast, their sirens cutting through the whispers sharp as a knife. They handcuffed Trevor right there in the grass, his face twisting in shock as the metal clicked shut. "Fraud and assault," one cop said loud, reading charges from my evidence. The footage, the journal, the bank papers Ms. Torres had prepped. Neighbors couldn't look me in the eye, their faces red as ripe tomatoes, ashamed of their silence that muddy day and every blind eye since. Mrs. Klein mumbled sorry, but it rang hollow like an empty can. The shed guy shuffled away, head down. I stood taller than I had in years, mud-stained memory replaced by hard-won dignity, like shedding snake skin after a long crawl. Trevor begged as they hauled him off, "Dad, wait." But his pleas fell flat as yesterday's bread. That night, my journal closed with one final line. "I am no one's burden. I am my own man." Peace settled in like warm sun after rain. And as for Trevor, he'll spend years in a cell learning the value of what he threw away: respect, family, freedom. No more free rides. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, comment, and smash the subscribe button. Also check out other videos on the channel. Joe's got more interesting stories for you.